What if the person you trusted most in the world, the one who saw you at your absolute lowest, was living a lie that cost $15 billion? They say money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly buy a very convincing disappearing act. We live in a world where the gap between the ultra-wealthy and the rest of us is wider than ever. But sometimes, that gap isn't measured in miles or bank accounts. Sometimes, it's measured in the dirt under a man's fingernails and the secrets he keeps in a drafty farmhouse. This is the story of Clara, a woman who lost everything, and Elias, a man who gave everything up. It's a journey that starts in the mud of a failing ranch and ends in the glass towers of Manhattan. But the ending isn't the fairy tale you're expecting. Imagine this. You're standing in a kitchen that smells of cedar and home. You've finally found peace. Then, the gravel crunches. 6 black SUVs surround your porch. A woman steps out, not in work boots, but in 6-inch stilettos that cost more than your car. She looks at the man you love and says 4 words that shatter your reality. "Honey, I'm home. Move." But before the diamonds and the betrayal, there was only the rain. Clara was shivering in her broken-down sedan, down to her last $50, staring at the gates of Thorne Ranch. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw a widower with 2 silent, grieving daughters who needed a mother. She saw a man named Elias who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. He offered her a roof over her head. He offered her a purpose. And in return, he kept his empire a secret. He let her believe he was a struggling farmer while his net worth could have bought the entire county 10 times over. We love to believe that love is enough to bridge any divide. We want to believe that the truth eventually sets us free. But what you're about to discover will change how you think about success and loyalty forever. Because when the farmer's real wife shows up, the question isn't just who Elias really is. It's who he wants to be when the cameras start flashing. Before we begin this incredible almost 1-hour journey, I want to welcome you to the channel. I want to be honest with you. This video took over 40 hours to research, 15 hours to write, and 30 hours to produce. Every detail of this complex web of wealth and deceit was carefully crafted to bring you the most compelling version of this story. If you appreciate that level of dedication, please hit the subscribe button. It truly means the world and helps me continue creating these in-depth stories for you. Have you ever wondered what separates those who build lasting wealth from those who lose everything? Is it hard work, or is it the ability to lie to the people who love you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. To understand how a titan of industry ended up milking cows in the middle of nowhere, we have to go back to the night the world thought Elias Thorne died. Due to the significant length requirement for this section, targeting approximately 31 minutes of narration, I will provide the first comprehensive movement of Act 1. This section establishes the dual worlds of our protagonists, Elias's cold, gilded cage in Manhattan and Clara's desperate struggle for survival. Before Elias Thorne was a man who smelled of hay and hard work, he was a man who owned the very air people breathed in New York City. At 34, Elias was the youngest CEO to ever grace the cover of Forbes 3 years in a row. His empire, Thorne Global, wasn't just a company. It was a shadow government. From a penthouse on 57th Street that cost a cool $65 million, he looked down at the world as if it were a chessboard. He didn't drive. He was driven in a custom-armored Maybach. He didn't eat. He fueled on Michelin-starred meals served on bone china. His world was one of white marble, glass walls, and absolute crushing silence. But if you looked closer, you'd see the cracks. In every photo of Elias at a gala or a board meeting, his eyes are somewhere else. He was surrounded by thousands of people, yet he was the loneliest man in Manhattan. His daughters, Sophie and Maya, lived in a separate wing of the penthouse, raised by a rotating staff of elite nannies. To them, their father wasn't a hero. He was a tall stranger in a suit who smelled of expensive cologne and fatigue. Then there was Isabella, his wife, a woman whose beauty was only matched by her ambition. To the public, they were the golden couple. Behind closed doors, their marriage was a legal merger. Cold, transactional, and increasingly dangerous. Isabella didn't want a husband. She wanted a throne. And she was tired of waiting for Elias to share the crown. Success at that level comes with a target on your back, and for Elias, the bullet came from inside his own home. It happened on a Tuesday. A leaked internal audit suggested that $400 million had vanished from the Thorne Charitable Trust. The finger was pointed directly at Elias. Within 48 hours, his board of directors turned. His friends stopped answering his calls. The man who owned the skyline was suddenly being treated like a common thief. But Elias knew the truth. The signatures on those fraudulent documents weren't his. They were Isabella's. The betrayal stung, but it wasn't what broke him. What broke him was hearing his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, ask the nanny if they were going to jail because Mommy said Daddy was a bad man. In that moment, the silk ties felt like nooses. The glass walls felt like a cage. Elias realized that his wealth had stripped him of the only thing that mattered, the trust of his children. He didn't fight the allegations. He didn't call his lawyers. Instead, he did the one thing a billionaire never does. He disappeared. A boating accident off the coast of Rhode Island left his yacht in pieces and the world believing the disgraced CEO had took the easy way out. But while the Coast Guard searched the Atlantic, a beat-up Ford truck was crossing the state line into a sleepy town called Oak Creek. While Elias was losing a kingdom, 200 miles away, Clara was losing a life she had barely begun to build. Clara didn't come from money. She came from a world of just enough. Just enough to pay the rent, just enough to keep the lights on, until just enough ran out. She had been a pediatric nurse at St. Jude's, a woman who spent her days caring for other people's children because she couldn't afford her own. But a medical emergency of her own, a burst appendix and a week of complications, left her with a $12,000 hospital bill and no job to return to. There is a specific kind of silence that happens when you realize you have nowhere to go. Clara felt it the night she packed her life into a cardboard box. She wasn't looking for a billionaire. She wasn't looking for a prince. She was looking for a reason to wake up the next morning without feeling the crushing weight of failure. She drove until the gaslight flickered, ending up on a dirt road where the trees grew thick and the air tasted like rain. That's when she saw the sign, Thorne Ranch, Help Wanted. She didn't know that the man behind that gate was a ghost. And she didn't know that by entering, she was stepping into the crosshairs of a $15 billion war. The first time they met, there was no red carpet. Only the smell of wet earth and the sound of a stalling engine. Clara's car died exactly 3 feet in front of the ranch's rusted iron gate. As the steam hissed from her hood, a man emerged from the shadows of the barn. He didn't look like a CEO. He wore a flannel shirt with frayed cuffs and jeans stained with grease. His hair was too long, and his face was covered in a week's worth of stubble. This was Elias Thorne's new skin. "I can't pay for a tow," Clara said, her voice trembling not from the cold, but from the humiliation of her circumstances. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. In New York, women looked at him as a bank account or a ladder. Here, this woman looked at him as a human being who might be able to help. "I don't need money," Elias replied, his voice raspy from disuse. "I need someone who knows how to talk to 2 little girls who haven't smiled in 6 months. You do that, and you've got a room." It was a contract, a roof for a soul. But as Clara stepped into the farmhouse, she noticed something strange. The floorboards creaked and the roof leaked. But on the mantel sat a small hand-carved wooden horse that looked suspiciously like a piece of art she'd seen in a high-end gallery. The farmer was a mystery. The nurse was a refugee. And outside, the world they both fled was starting to wake up. If you were born into Elias's circumstances, surrounded by billions but betrayed by everyone you loved, do you think you would have made the same choice to walk away and live in the mud? Let me know what you think in the comments. As Clara settled into her new role, the farmer began to realize that hiding from the world is easy. Hiding from your own heart. That's where the real danger lies. Given the expansive 30-minute duration for this act, I have structured the first primary movement of Act 2. This section focuses on the catalyst. The moment the friction of their new reality sparks a flame, and the subtle clues that begin to unravel Elias's secret. The truth doesn't always come out in a boardroom or a courtroom. Sometimes, it slips out in the middle of a desperate midnight emergency. For months into Clara's stay at the Thorne Ranch, the routine had become a lifeline. She was no longer a stranger. She was the heartbeat of the house. But the peace was shattered when Maya, the youngest daughter, woke up with a terrifying high-grade fever. In a normal world, a billionaire would call a private doctor. In this world, a poor farmer should have panicked about the cost of an ER visit. But when Clara ran into the hallway, she didn't find a panicked farmer. She found a man with the cold, surgical precision of a commander. Elias didn't fumble. He didn't check his wallet. He grabbed a satellite phone, a device that cost more than the truck in the driveway, and barked orders into it that sounded less like a plea and more like a high-level directive. "I need Dr. Eris on a secure line. Now," he whispered into the phone, thinking Clara was out of earshot. Clara stood in the shadows, her nursing instincts warring with her growing suspicion. Who was this farmer who had the personal number of the world's leading pediatric specialist? The fever broke by dawn, but the foundation of their relationship had shifted. For the first time, Clara realized that the man she was falling for wasn't just humble. He was hiding. Elias saw the look in her eyes. He knew he had shown too much of the CEO, and not enough of the cattleman. The decision he made next would set everything in motion. He decided to stop hiding from Clara and start trusting her, without actually telling her the truth. Some secrets are buried in the ground, but others are hidden in plain sight, tucked away in the pockets of an old work jacket. A week after the fever, Clara was doing the laundry, a task she'd grown to love because it smelled of sun and hard work. As she emptied the pockets of Elias's heavy canvas coat, her fingers brushed against something cold and hard. It wasn't a coin. It wasn't a tool. It was a signet ring made of heavy platinum, engraved with a crest she recognized from the news, the Thorne Global Eagle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered the headlines from a year ago. Billionaire CEO Elias Thorne presumed dead in yacht explosion. She looked at the ring, then through the window at the man currently shoveling manure in the rain. The contrast was absurd. The man outside was kind, patient, and looked at her as if she were the only woman on earth. The man on the news was a ruthless predator, accused of stealing millions. Clara had a choice. She could confront him and risk losing the only home she'd ever felt safe in, or she could bury the ring and play the game. She chose a third option. She began to investigate the poor farmer herself, looking for the man beneath the mud. As the first snow fell on Oak Creek, the contract between the farmer and the nurse turned into something far more dangerous. A genuine, passionate love. The day-to-day reality of the ranch was grueling. The tractor broke down twice. The winter feed was running low. But instead of the stress breaking them, it bonded them. Elias taught Clara how to read the clouds. Clara taught Elias how to laugh again. They were living on a budget of $40 a week for groceries, while Elias had billions sitting in offshore accounts he refused to touch. He wanted to see if he could survive as a nobody. He wanted to see if Clara would stay if the money never appeared. One night by the fire, Elias reached out and took Clara's hand. "I don't have much to offer you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with a truth he couldn't fully speak. "Just this land and a name that isn't worth much around here." Clara looked at the calluses on his hands, the hands of a man who chose to work for his bread rather than steal it. She realized then that even if he was the man from the news, the man in front of her was someone different. She kissed him, a silent promise that she was all in, regardless of the secrets. But while they were building a life in the snow, the world of Manhattan was thawing. A private investigator hired by Isabella Thorne had just tracked a secure satellite call to a tower near Oak Creek. The wolf was at the door, and she was bringing a pack of lawyers and a hunger for revenge. Hardship doesn't just build character. It strips away the masks we wear until only the raw truth remains. Elias began to change. The cold, calculating CEO was being replaced by a man of grit. He stopped looking at the satellite phone. He stopped checking the stock tickers. He started planning a future. A real one. He decided he was going to sell the hidden assets he had left to buy the neighboring plot of land, officially making the ranch a success on its own merits. Clara, too, found a strength she didn't know she possessed. She wasn't just the mother figure anymore. She was the ranch's backbone. She organized the books, she healed the livestock, and she protected the girls with a ferocity that Elias had never seen in Isabella. She learned that wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's who stands beside you when the storm hits. And the storm was coming. Elias prepared a surprise for Clara. He bought a simple silver band from the local jeweler. He was going to ask her to be his wife, not a mother for his daughters, but his partner. He was ready to leave the Thorne name in the mud forever. But as he walked toward the house to propose, a black SUV, sleek, expensive, and out of place, pulled into the muddy driveway. At this point, Elias had to choose between his old life of power and his new life of peace. If he proposed to Clara, he would have to tell her the truth, risking her thinking he was a criminal. If he kept quiet, he was building a marriage on a lie. What would you have done? This decision would define everything that came next. The car door opened, and the smell of expensive French perfume cut through the scent of the pines. The farmer's past hadn't just arrived. It had come to burn his new life to the ground. The dream didn't just end. It was dismantled, piece by piece, by a woman who viewed a $15 billion empire as a personal playground. As Isabella Thorne stepped out of the SUV, the silence on the ranch became deafening. She didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like an executioner. Within minutes, the poor farmer was gone, replaced by a man backed into a corner. Isabella didn't come alone. She brought a legal team that specialized in scorched earth tactics. Their first move? A temporary restraining order claiming Elias was mentally unfit, followed by a freeze on the ranch's modest bank account. The only $3,000 Clara and Elias had saved for the winter. The most painful moment wasn't the loss of money. It was the look on the girls' faces. Sophie and Maya, who had finally started to call Clara Mom, were suddenly being told their life was a lie. Elias stood in the mud, humiliated. He had tried to build a sanctuary on a foundation of secrets, and now the weight of his past was crushing the people he loved most. Clara stood by the porch, holding the girls, watching the man she loved crumble under the weight of a world she never knew he belonged to. "You have 24 hours to vacate," Isabella sneered, her eyes fixed on Clara. "Elias is coming back to Manhattan to face the embezzlement charges I've meticulously framed him for. And as for you, you're just the help. Get out. When you lose a fortune, you lose your power. When you lose a lie, you lose your soul." The next 48 hours were a descent into hell. The town of Oak Creek, which had once respected Elias, turned overnight. The billionaire thief was all the local news talked about. The grocery store refused Clara's credit. The hardware store demanded immediate payment for the winter supplies. They were down to $42 in cash and a half-tank of gas. Elias sat in the dark barn, the silver engagement ring still in his pocket, a useless piece of metal in a world of platinum-grade betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara asked, her voice a hollow whisper in the hayloft. "Because I wanted to be the man you saw," Elias replied, "not the monster the world created." In that moment of absolute despair, the romantic tension snapped into raw, jagged pain. They weren't lovers in a fairy tale anymore. They were two broken people in a cold barn, facing a future that looked like a prison cell. But the darkness has a way of revealing who is truly loyal. While Isabella was celebrating in a five-star hotel in the city, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Marcus, Elias's former head of security, the only man who knew the truth about the accident. Victory doesn't always go to the man with the most money. It goes to the one who has nothing left to lose. Marcus didn't bring money. He brought a flash drive. It contained the digital footprint of Isabella's transactions, the proof that she was the one who drained the Thorne global accounts while Elias was dead. Elias had been trying to fight like a farmer. Marcus reminded him that he was still the architect of steel. He spent the night at the kitchen table, fueled by Clara's coffee and a newfound rage. He wasn't fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for the roof over Clara's head. Elias looked at Clara. "If I do this, I have to become that man again. The CEO. The predator. I might lose the farmer you loved." Clara took his hand, her grip like iron. "The farmer was just a mask, Elias. The man who protects his family. That's who I love. Go get your life back." They didn't run. They didn't hide. Using the last of their gas, they drove to the town hall where Isabella was attempting to buy the ranch land under a shell company to evict them. The confrontation was no longer inevitable. It was happening. "Do you think Elias should have stayed a farmer?" and tried to run away with Clara to start over in secret? Or was he right to step back into the lion's den to reclaim his name? Share your perspective below. While the world watched the fall of a giant, a new kind of power was being forged in the backwoods of Oak Creek. As Elias walked into the town meeting, he wasn't wearing a suit. He was still in his work boots, his flannel shirt stained with the ranch's dirt. But his walk, that was the walk of a man who owned the room. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He laid out the evidence of Isabella's fraud in front of the local sheriff and the press she had invited to witness his shame. He revealed that he hadn't stolen the millions. He had used his personal fortune to quietly pay off the debts of every struggling farm in the county over the last year. The townspeople who had been ready to lynch him fell silent. They realized the billionaire hadn't been hiding from them. He had been protecting them. Elias turned to Isabella, whose face had turned the color of ash. "You came here for the land," he said quietly. "But you forgot one thing. I don't need a boardroom to be a Thorne. I just need my word." The struggle wasn't over. Isabella had one final card to play, a secret about Clara's own past that she'd been saving for the ultimate kill. But for the first time, Elias and Clara were standing on the same side of the line. We're at the midpoint of this incredible story. If you're still here, I genuinely appreciate you. This journey from mud to millions is about to take its final, most explosive turn. What's kept you engaged so far? Is it the romance or the craving for justice? Let me know in the comments. The sheriff reached for his handcuffs, but he didn't point them at Elias. The tide had turned, but as the black SUVs began to retreat, Clara realized the war was only just beginning. The momentum didn't just shift, it roared back to life like a dormant engine finally given high-octane fuel. After the standoff at Town Hall, the farmer didn't retreat to his barn. He retreated to a makeshift war room. With Marcus's flash drive and a secure laptop, Elias began to systematically dismantle Isabella's web of lies from a kitchen table that still had flour dust on it. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. Elias discovered a series of wire transfers, $32 million, sent from the Thorne Charitable Trust to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The signature wasn't a digital forgery. It was a physical one, dated on a day Elias was confirmed to be at a public summit in Davos. Elias looked at the screen, then at Clara, who was asleep in the chair next to him, her hand still resting on his arm. For years, he had operated with a heart of stone, but seeing her loyalty gave him a different kind of edge. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a man with a home to protect. He realized he didn't need his $15 billion office to be powerful. He was powerful because he had nothing left to hide. He sent one single email. It wasn't to his lawyers. It was to the 3 largest institutional investors of Thorne Global. It contained 3 words: "The architect lives." By sunrise, the stock price of Thorne Global began to tremble. True redemption isn't about getting your money back. It's about proving you're worth more than your bank account. Elias spent the next month working twice as hard. Not in the boardroom, but in the community. He used the last of his ghost funds to repair the Oak Creek Community Center. He didn't hire a contractor. He swung the hammer himself. Slowly, the town's suspicion turned into a fierce, protective loyalty. When Isabella's lawyers tried to return with an eviction notice for the ranch, they found 50 local farmers parked their tractors across the road. The billionaire thief was gone. In his place was a neighbor they were willing to bleed for. Clara watched this transformation with a mix of awe and terror. She saw Elias accepting responsibility for the arrogance of his past. He apologized to his daughters for the years he spent as a tall stranger in a suit. He sat in the grass and played dolls with Maya. He taught Sophie how to calculate the yield of a harvest. He was finally becoming the father his wealth had prevented him from being. As his reputation in Oak Creek solidified, his influence in New York began to surge. The investors, tired of Isabella's volatile leadership and the dipping stock price, began to reach out. They didn't want the old Elias. They wanted the man who had survived the mud. Children are the ultimate mirror. They reflect not what we say, but who we have become in the dark. Sophie and Maya, once the silent, grieving children of a broken penthouse, were thriving. The ranch had given them something New York never could, a sense of reality. Sophie won the regional science fair with a project on sustainable irrigation, a project she built with her father in the barn. Maya's nightmares had stopped. They weren't Thorne heiresses anymore. They were ranch girls with dirt under their nails and fire in their spirits. Their character was no longer a product of elite nannies, but a reflection of Clara's empathy and Elias's resilience. Elias stood on the porch one evening, watching Clara teach Maya how to bandage a calf's leg. He realized this was his greatest achievement. Not the skyscrapers. Not the mergers. This. He turned to Marcus, who was leaning against the truck. "I'm ready," Elias said. "Let's end this." The stage was set. Isabella was preparing for a massive gala in Manhattan to celebrate the final merger of Thorne Global with a rival firm, a move that would legally erase Elias's remaining stakes forever. She thought she had won. She didn't know the farmer had already booked a flight. The most dangerous man in the world is the one who has already lost everything and realized he didn't need it. Elias traded his flannel for a suit. It wasn't a new one. It was the one he'd kept in a vacuum-sealed bag in the back of his truck for a year. It fit differently now. His shoulders were broader from the ranch work. His face was leaner and etched with the lines of a man who had seen the bottom and climbed back up. Clara stood before him, straightening his tie. She didn't look like a struggling nurse. She looked like the queen of a kingdom built on truth. "Don't go back there to become him," Clara whispered. Elias kissed her forehead. "I'm going back there to tell them he's dead. And to bring the rest of us home." They didn't arrive in a fleet of SUVs. They took a regular taxi to the front of the Thorne Plaza. Isabella was on stage, a champagne flute in her hand, leaning in to sign the merger papers. The cameras were flashing. The world was watching. And then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. At this point, Elias has transformed into someone completely different. He's no longer the cold CEO, nor is he just a simple farmer. He's something new entirely. Do you think people can truly change their core nature? Or is he just putting on a more sophisticated mask to win? This is important for what comes next. The music stopped. The cameras turned. The dead billionaire had returned, and he wasn't alone. He was bringing the dirt of the ranch into the cleanest room in New York. Isabella Thorne thought she was signing the death warrant of a legacy. Instead, she was providing the stage for the greatest resurrection Manhattan had ever seen. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. Over 500 of the world's most powerful investors, journalists, and socialites had gathered to witness the merger of Thorne Global and its rival, Sterling Corporation. On stage, Isabella sat behind a mahogany desk, a gold fountain pen in her hand. The deal would finalize the transfer of the last $2 billion of Elias's personal equity into her control. Elias stood in the foyer, invisible behind the heavy velvet curtains. He wasn't the man who had fled this building a year ago. That man was defensive, arrogant, and alone. This man had Clara's hand in his and a flash drive in his pocket that contained the truth. He wasn't there to save his money. He was there to save his name. Elias took a final breath. He looked at Clara. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She was wearing a simple navy dress and the confidence of a woman who had seen a billionaire scrub a kitchen floor. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "I've spent a year in the mud, Clara," Elias replied. "A room full of sharks doesn't scare me anymore." Isabella leaned into the microphone. "Today, we bury the scandals of the past and look toward a thornless future." She touched the pen to the paper. "Stop the music," a voice rang out from the back of the hall. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a mountain. The collective gasp of 500 people sounds like a sudden intake of air before a scream. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Elias walked down the center aisle. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. His bearing was regal, but his eyes were hard. Isabella dropped the pen. It clattered against the marble floor, the only sound in the suffocating silence. She looked at him as if he were a monster from a nightmare. "Elias," she stammered, her voice cracking through the speakers. You were lost at sea." "I was," Elias said, reaching the foot of the stage. "But I found my way back to the shore." And I brought the receipts. The visual contrast was jarring. Isabella was draped in a $100,000 gown, yet she looked small and terrified. Elias stood there, his suit tailored perfectly but his face weathered by the sun and wind of the ranch. He looked like a king who had fought in the trenches with his soldiers. Next to him, Clara stood tall, a silent witness to the justice about to be served. Isabella tried to recover, her face twisting into a mask of cold fury. Security. This man is an imposter, a fraud who embezzled millions from this company. Elias didn't flinch. He simply signaled to the tech booth. Marcus, play the file. The truth doesn't whisper. It screams when it's been buried alive for too long. The massive LED screens behind the stage flickered to life. It wasn't a corporate presentation. It was a recording from the ranch's security feed, the night Isabella showed up to threaten Clara. I don't care about the company, Elias. Isabella's voice boomed through the ballroom speakers. I care about the throne. I framed you once, and I'll do it again. Now sign the ranch over or I'll make sure those girls never see the sun. The room erupted. The journalists scrambled for their cameras. The investors stood up in outrage. But the final blow came when Elias pulled up the bank records. The clear, undeniable path of the $42 million Isabella had moved into her offshore accounts. I didn't steal from the trust, Isabella, Elias said, his voice echoing. I used my own money to fix what you broke. While you were planning this party, I was paying back the families you robbed. Isabella looked around the room, searching for an ally. She found none. Even her own lawyers were stepping away from the desk, closing their briefcases. The empire she had built on a foundation of lies was dissolving in the glow of the projector. Justice is a slow-moving river, but when it breaks the dam, it sweeps away everything in its path. The NYPD didn't wait for the gala to end. Two officers walked onto the stage. There was no struggle. Isabella Thorne, the woman who had ruled Manhattan social circles with an iron fist, was led away in handcuffs. Her heels clicked hollowly on the marble, a stark contrast to the silence of the crowd. Elias didn't watch her go. He turned his back to the stage and looked at the board members. The merger is off, he stated. Thorne Global is returning to its roots. We are liquidating the vanity assets. We are moving our headquarters to the Hudson Valley. And we are starting with a new board of directors. People who know the value of a day's work. A senior investor, a man who had known Elias's father, walked up and extended his hand. Welcome back, Elias. Or should I call you the farmer? Elias shook the man's hand firmly. The farmer is the one who saved the CEO. I think I'll keep both. He looked at Clara. She was smiling, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. She saw the power returning to him, the millions flowing back into his accounts. She wondered if the farmhouse in Oak Creek was now just a memory. The greatest revenge isn't seeing your enemy fall. It's realizing you no longer care enough to watch. As the ballroom cleared, Elias stood alone with Clara amidst the empty tables and spilled champagne. He had his company back. He had his billions back. But as he looked at the gold fountain pen Isabella had dropped, he didn't feel the rush of victory he expected. He felt a deep, profound sense of peace. He realized that the mud hadn't been a punishment. It had been his education. He had found a woman who loved him when he had nothing, and daughters who respected him when he was just a father. We're going home, aren't we? Clara asked softly. Elias pulled the silver engagement ring from his pocket, the one he had bought with ranch money. He knelt on the marble floor of the Plaza Hotel. I don't want to live in this building, Clara, he said. I want to live where the air smells like pines and the work means something. Will you marry a man who happens to be a billionaire, but promises to always be a farmer at heart? Clara didn't look at the ring. She looked at the man who had faced the world and didn't blink. She said yes, not to the millions, but to the mud they had shared. The confrontation is over. Justice has been served, and Elias has reclaimed his life, but on his own terms. Do you feel satisfied with how this played out? Or would you have wanted Elias to be more vindictive toward Isabella? There's no wrong answer here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But every story has an epilogue. As they walked out of the plaza, Elias stopped at the curb. He didn't call a limousine. He hailed a yellow cab pointed toward the north and whispered, "Take us back to the ranch." The world moves on quickly, but for those who build their lives on shadows, the light of truth leaves nowhere to hide. Isabella Thorne's exit from the Plaza Hotel wasn't just a social scandal. It was a total systemic collapse. Within 48 hours of the gala, the federal government froze every asset tied to her name. The $32 million she'd siphoned was tracked to 4 different offshore accounts, leading to a sprawling indictment for wire fraud and grand larceny. She went from a penthouse overlooking Central Park to a 6x9 cell in a minimum security facility, awaiting a trial that everyone knew she would lose. Her friends in the high fashion circles of New York didn't just abandon her. They erased her. Her name was stripped from the charity boards, and her designer dresses were auctioned off by the state to pay back the Thorne Trust. There is a specific kind of silence in a prison visiting room. Isabella sat there, weeks later, staring at a reflection she no longer recognized. She had spent her life chasing a throne, only to realize that a throne without loyalty is just a very lonely chair. She had lost her status, her wealth, and her family. Not because Elias took them, but because she never truly had them. As Isabella's world shrank to the size of a courtyard, Elias's world began to expand in ways he had never imagined. But he wasn't looking back at Manhattan. He was looking forward to the first spring thaw in Oak Creek. Success is the sweetest form of vindication, especially when it's grown from the very ground your enemies tried to bury you in. Elias didn't return to the CEO's office in Thorne Plaza. Instead, he moved the entire corporate headquarters to an old renovated textile mill just 20 minutes from the ranch. He rebranded the company as Thorne Earth, focusing entirely on sustainable agriculture and rural infrastructure. The industry called him crazy until the first quarter results came in. By cutting the corporate bloat and focusing on real-world impact, the company's valuation surged to $18 billion. He wasn't just a tech giant anymore. He was the face of a new kind of capitalism, one that valued the worker as much as the shareholder. He was finally recognized, not for the size of his bank account, but for the depth of his character. The local community of Oak Creek, once his protectors, were now his partners. He built a state-of-the-art medical clinic in town and named it after Clara's mother. He didn't do it for the tax break. He did it because he knew what it felt like to be one hospital bill away from losing everything. Clara, too, found her own path. She didn't become a socialite wife. She became the director of pediatric outreach for the new clinic. She was no longer running from her past. She was using it to light the way for others. Sometimes you have to lose the world to find out why you're in it. Elias often stands on his porch at twilight, looking out over the hundreds of acres he now manages. He thinks about the accident and the betrayal. He realizes now that Isabella's cruelty was actually the greatest gift he ever received. Without her greed, he would still be that cold man in the glass tower, drinking expensive wine and feeling nothing. The struggle didn't break him. It polished him. It stripped away the vanity and left behind a man who knew how to build something that lasts. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the hunger, the cold nights in the barn, and even the fear. Those moments taught him that wealth is a tool, not a destination. He learned that the most valuable thing he owns isn't the company. It's the ability to look Clara in the eye every morning without a single lie between them. He realized that justice isn't about making your enemy suffer. It's about making your own life so beautiful that their influence over you vanishes completely. A father's legacy isn't written in a will. It's written in the confidence of his children's stride. Sophie and Maya are no longer the timid girls who arrived at the ranch in silence. Sophie is now a teenager, leading the local 4-H club and talking about studying environmental law. She remembers the Manhattan years as if they were a dream, but she lives the ranch years as her reality. They view their father not as a billionaire, but as a man who can fix a fence and a broken heart with the same steady hands. They know about Isabella. Elias never hid the truth, but they view her with a quiet pity rather than hate. She is a cautionary tale to them, a reminder that diamonds are cold, but home is warm. They adore Clara. To them, she wasn't the woman who filled a vacancy. She was the woman who built a family. They see the way their father looks at her, and it has taught them what love actually looks like. Partnership, sacrifice, and a lot of laughter over burnt toast. They are the living proof that you can survive a shipwreck and learn to build a better boat. In the end, we all end up exactly where our choices have led us. Today, Thorne Ranch is a model of innovation and peace. Elias and Clara have been married for 3 years now. They have a new son, and the farmhouse has been expanded, though the roof still has that one spot that creaks when it rains. Elias refuses to fix it because it reminds him of the night Clara first arrived. Isabella Thorne remains in a state facility. Her appeals were denied. She spends her days in the prison library, reading old copies of fashion magazines that no longer feature her name. Her world is small, quiet, and entirely of her own making. Elias Thorne is one of the wealthiest men in America again, but you wouldn't know it if you met him at the Oak Creek Diner. He's the guy in the worn boots who always tips 100%. He's the man who found his soul in the mud and decided to keep it there. As the sun sets over the valley, Elias pulls Clara close. They don't talk about the millions. They talk about the harvest. They talk about the kids. They talk about the future. Looking at where everyone ended up, from the glass towers to the ranch and from the penthouse to the prison. Do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of the choices they made? I want to hear what you think in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this 1-hour journey of betrayal, resilience, and the true meaning of wealth. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of those who lost it all only to find everything. Until next time, remember, the mud might be dirty, but it's the only place where things can truly grow. If this journey has taught us anything, it's that the most expensive things in life have nothing to do with money. We've watched Elias Thorne fall from the peak of a glass skyscraper into the mud of a failing ranch. We've seen Clara lose her last $50 only to find a billionaire hiding in the woods. But the real story isn't about the $15 billion Elias reclaimed. It's about the fact that he was willing to lose it all to keep his integrity. True success isn't a destination. It's the quality of the person you become while you're trying to get there. Wealth inequality is a reality of our world, but character inequality is what truly defines our lives. Elias had to be stripped of his power to realize that his true worth wasn't in his portfolio. It was in his pulse. Justice in this story didn't come from a gavel or a prison sentence. It came through excellence. Elias didn't win by being more vindictive than Isabella. He won by being more resilient. He proved that you can't truly defeat a man who is comfortable standing in the rain. Elias Thorne doesn't look back at his time in the mud as a tragedy. He looks at it as his graduation. If you asked Elias for advice today, he wouldn't tell you how to play the stock market. He'd tell you to check the foundation of your house before the storm hits. He's changed from a man who commanded thousands to a man who serves a few. He defines success now by the sound of laughter in his kitchen, not the silence in his boardroom. I used to think power was about how many people you could influence, Elias once told a journalist. Now I know power is about how many people you can protect. He stopped trying to own the world and started trying to deserve his place in it. He's learned that hardship is just a filter. It removes the people who only love your shadow and leaves behind the ones who love your soul. He's grateful for the betrayal because it taught him that the only opinions that matter are the ones belonging to the people who share your dinner table. The greatest inheritance Elias is leaving his children isn't a trust fund. It's a blueprint for a life well lived. Sophie and Maya are growing up with a rare perspective. They've seen the summit and the valley, and they know that neither is permanent. The struggle didn't break them. It prepared them. It instilled values that no elite private school could ever teach. Empathy, grit, and the understanding that everyone has a story hidden beneath their surface. They are breaking the generational pattern of the cold, distant elite. They won't be thorns who look down on the world. They will be leaders who know how to plant a seed and wait for it to grow. Their future is bright because it's grounded in the earth, not just floating in the cloud. The most profound form of closure isn't forgiveness. It's the realization that you no longer feel the weight of the person who hurt you. Elias doesn't wake up wishing Isabella harm. He doesn't track the days of her sentence. He understands now that Isabella was a victim of her own greed long before she was a criminal. She was a woman who thought a crown would make her feel safe, never realizing that a crown is just a heavy piece of metal that makes your head ache. Her downfall was a natural consequence of her choices. She chose the tower. Elias chose the ranch. She chose the ego. He chose the family. Her opinion of him, which once dictated his every move, has become as irrelevant as the dust on his boots. He is at peace because he knows that while she is locked in a cell, he is finally, for the first time in his life, free. Your worth is not a number on a screen. It is the courage you show when the screen goes dark. As we close this chapter, I want you to look at your own life. We all face moments where we feel like we're in the mud. Moments of betrayal, loss, or overwhelming doubt. But remember Elias. Remember that a temporary setback is often just the universe clearing the path for a greater success. Don't measure your progress by other people's standards. Don't let your circumstances dictate your character. If you can love yourself through the transformation, if you can maintain your integrity when everything else is being stripped away, you've already won. Success isn't about never falling. It's about what you bring back up with you when you finally stand. Elias brought back a family, a purpose, and a heart. The story of the billionaire farmer is over, but your story is just beginning. Thank you for staying with me through this 3-hour journey. This was more than just a tale of money and revenge. It was a reminder that home isn't a place you find, it's a place you build with the people you trust. Looking at where everyone ended up, do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of choices? I want to hear your final thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your support allows me to keep telling these stories of the human spirit. Until next time, keep your head in the stars and your feet in the mud. I'm the Storykeeper, and this was From Mud to Millions. 3 hours ago, we began this journey with a man who thought he had lost his life in the Atlantic, and a woman who thought she had lost her future on a dusty roadside. We've watched the transformation of Elias Thorne from a cold, distant billionaire to a man who found his soul in the chores of a failing ranch. We saw the pivotal moment when Clara chose to trust a stranger with nothing but a roof and a secret. From the shocking betrayal by Isabella to the high-stakes confrontation in the heart of Manhattan, this hasn't just been a story about money. It's been a story about the masks we wear and the courage it takes to take them off. The turning point wasn't the day Elias got his billions back. It was the day he realized he didn't need them to be a father, a partner, or a man of honor. He went from the architect of steel to the architect of a family. And in doing so, he built something that no market crash could ever destroy. Think back to that rainy night at the start. 2 broken people and 2 grieving children. Now, look at the sun setting over the Thorne Ranch. The transformation is complete, not because their bank account changed, but because their hearts did. This story is significant because it mirrors the quiet battles we all fight when the world isn't watching. Why does the story of a billionaire pretending to be a farmer resonate with millions? Because we all know what it feels like to be underestimated. We all know the sting of betrayal and the weight of a secret. This journey matters because it proves that our circumstances are just the weather, but our character is the house. The universal themes of resilience, love, and the pursuit of a real life are what keep us engaged. It offers hope that even when your world is leveled to the ground, the soil that's left behind is the richest place to plant something new. It reminds us that the people who see you when you're nothing are the only ones who deserve to be there when you're everything. That is a wealth that can't be measured in gold. As you close this video and return to your own life, I want you to carry one thought with you. Your current struggle is a chapter, not the whole book. What Elias and Clara's story teaches us is that you should never let a temporary setback define your permanent worth. If you're in your own version of the mud right now, whether it's financial, emotional, or a betrayal that has left you reeling, keep moving. Use this time to develop the skills that necessity demands. Use it to find the people who truly stay. Your integrity is the only currency that never devalues. When you respond to hardship with grace and resilience, you are preparing for a comeback that will make your setbacks look like a setup for greatness. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable about resilience and success, please leave a like and share your biggest takeaway in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights are what make this community so incredibly special. Next time, I'll be telling you about Julian Vane, A man who spent 20 years building a tech empire only to have his own son vote him out of the company. His story of a boardroom revenge that took place over a decade will absolutely blow your mind. You won't want to miss it. Some promises are whispered, but the one you make to yourself is the one you must keep. Remember, you are not defined by what others think of you. You are defined by how you respond when life tests you. Elias Thorne proved that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so beautiful and so authentic that your critics become irrelevant. Stay strong, stay focused, and never let anyone convince you that you're nothing. You are everything you choose to become. Until next time, I'm the Story Keeper. Thank you for watching.